Hello and welcome to PSG Review and Happy New Year. I think it's still fine thing to wish you as it is very early days. I don't think the cutoff time has yet happened even for Larry David, but that's neither here nor there. We have quite a healthy bit of football to talk about, even the first trophy of the 2025.
You are listening to PSG Review. Here's your host, Mikko.
Well, indeed, we do have a lot of football to talk about as the transfer window is officially open. The news are circling over us like the vultures over a carcass, but we are in fairly good shape, so there's nothing too much to talk about in my opinion. There's talk about the talk. That's very meta football at its finest these days, but nothing very significant so far. Some possibilities, and while I'm not tapping on anyone's phones here and have no inside track to know the answers, my guess is that as per usual in January, probably a lot less will happen in the end, what we are led to believe. That just tends to be it, like it or not, and we have that chat in a bit, but of course the actual football has now also started for our Parisian team for the new year also. Capital of Qatar, Doha was hosting Trophée des Champions on Sunday, which as I record this on Monday was yesterday for me and quite a bit of controversy among some people. Admittedly, at least some of those people aren't the type of people whose opinions I find very interesting or insightful or even engaging, but there you have it. There's always an element of anti-Arab sentiments mixed with anti-PSG and Qatar talking points. You know, the usual. And I have always said, and I insist on saying this, Qatar very much needs to be examined and scrutinized, at the very least as much as everyone else. Of course, there needs to be balance, but our club's proprietor and the main shareholder QSI, which is of course linked to the state itself, is no way beyond criticism. It isn't and it shouldn't be, as is no one else. I have been looking into this bit, by the way, and it's actually pretty interesting stuff. Not making it a long story, and I'm not really equipped to get into the detail anyway because I haven't really formulated this thought fully, but there is an interesting version of the story that we keep on hearing about Qatar. We often talk about sports washing as something that it does to cover the very problematic labor rights issues or issues with the sexual minorities, things of that nature, and these are very serious concerns, of course. But think about this. Think of it from this angle. Without football, without the World Cup that was there a few years ago, and without, say, PSG, imagine if none of that would have ever happened, if those things wouldn't exist. Then in that context, then what would you know about the country of Qatar, the state of Qatar? What would you know about it? Like genuinely, how aware would you be of this small country? Essentially, by making themselves a global player and a PR project, it's also an act of self-defense in that right now, if someone were to attack them, and I'm talking about literal actual attack them, it would have an entirely different impact on the news narratives because we do have some sort of a relationship with the country, even on a level of an idea. And even if that relationship for many was negative, they at least know about it. There's some contact point. It would not feel as insignificant in a way that sometimes these things can feel when we talk about smaller countries that we might not have heard of. And I come from a smaller country. I don't know if you have heard of it or how much you know about it, but this is the kind of it's like a geo-branding exercise that you're trying to give a brand to your country, and that is not just for trade and things like that, but it kind of plays many different roles in a global politics and geopolitics. And I'm not saying it with any pride, by the way, that we would perhaps know very little about Qatar, or that I would perhaps know very little about Qatar. You know, it's the same thing as say, it's like Kuwait, country like that, and they had to pay the price some decades ago, or Yemen, or whatever else. These are different countries, very different countries, but everyone is just trying to exist. So there is an argument to be made that Qatar has had to raise its international profile in order to provide itself with some security. which in and of itself is not a bad thing. I think that's very legitimate concern for a small country. They have to create these kind of measures, security measures that might help them if things get very bad, especially in the neighborhood that Qatar is in and the kind of countries that are there. In that, for instance, Qatar is a very different thing to, say, Saudi Arabia. So if you're talking about the sports washing that Saudi Arabia is doing, I would like to make the distinction between that and what happens in Qatar. And I know that, the haters will say that I'm being an apologist for Qatar. Really, like I said, and I insist on saying that they need to be criticized where criticisms are needed, and those things exist. Those are very real things, but at the same time, you kind of can't fault them in the current climate to trying to raise their international profile and therefore providing themselves with some sort of sense of security, and not just sense, but an actual security, And these things aren't actually really even connected to these issues that I mentioned, especially with the migrant labor and things like that, their lack of rights. That's a regional issue. It's a problem. It's a very real problem, and I do not take it lightly. But also, realistically, I come from Europe, so let's not pretend that we don't have increasingly powerful political actors in all countries pretty much that would love to take away the rights from the migrant laborers and migrants in general, or refugees or sexual minorities. You name it. And it doesn't make it any less bad in another country like Qatar. It's all awful, but the criticism we make has to be morally consistent. That is all that I'm asking. No more about that. It's an interesting idea. I think I was listening to it in another podcast where this point was made much more eloquently than I could, but there's something in it, I think. There's something there to think about. Needless to say, by the way, of course, that in the last couple of years, this match, Trophée des Champions, has twice been organized in an apartheid country, which now is engaging in a genocide, and somehow many of these same people complaining about it now being played in Qatar were nowhere to be seen or heard with their criticism at the time. It's a funny old world, isn't it? Let's look at the football itself. After the end of the year break and a bit of a holiday, PSG was back more or less with the type of starting 11 that you would imagine. And I kind of hate to say this because I was expecting and imagining that Gonzalo Ramos might not be a starter. Not because I think that's a sensible thing to do, to leave him on the bench. I don't, but because I have come to understand that for some inexplicable reason, that is the view of the coach Luis Enrique. Now, I'll be the first to admit that Luis Enrique knows a million times more about football than I do. He absolutely does. And also, needless to say that in the end, it is the results that count. And how you get there, that's arguable. I mean, we do want to win with flair and creativity, with beautiful football, good entertainment and things of that nature. But at the same time, a result is a result and a win is a win. And so long as the results are coming in, there's a case to be made that Luis Enrique is doing a great job. But this is the one thing that I don't understand. He is a very stubborn person. I think that is his flaw. He's been doing a lot of great things, and I think on the whole, things are very much, for me, still on the positive. I would say that the scale is tipping to the positive direction for me still, but there are some of these things and the stubbornness with players such as Gonzalo Ramos. It's a little bit weird. It's a little bit inexplicable, and I think the same thing actually happened with Nordi Mukiele, who's now on loan in Bundesliga in Bayer Leverkusen for this season, but his future in Paris seems really a non-starter. And that is a little bit of a problem because there were concerns and complaints, I suppose, that was at least being rumored that Nordi Mukiele had engaged too much in the Parisian nightlife, which is a thing in and of itself. But I think that he was nothing short of professional on pitch, and he was somebody who was able to play both defensive wings, left back, right back, wing backs, and he was also able to play centrally. And whether he was the best in the world or world class in any of those positions, that's another thing. But if we're looking at the depth in our defensive structure at the moment, it's very slim, especially behind Achraf Hakimi, where he would have been really a great player. So there's some of these things where the stubbornness and the decision against the person, it seems, just complicates things a little bit too much. And I'm not saying, not by a long shot actually, that Gonzalo Ramos is in the same boat with somebody like Mukiele, but there are some warning signs here. I do find it a little bit of a concern, I have to admit. I can't really quite wrap my head around it, but anyway, this is something that is outside of my control anyway. Desiree was also getting a start, as was Lee Kang-in. Other than that, it was pretty much the usual suspects there in the mix, including Donnarumma, who had recovered from studs on his face incident which took place against Monaco before Christmas. Same opponent, very different place, different match and all sorts, but 2 wins out of 2 matches, that's not too bad for PSG. A stadium in Qatar, in Doha, was far from full. There were a lot of empty seats there, reminding us that the reason that this match was played in Qatar to begin with was because they were really the ones who would have it. You kind of have to look at it in its actual context, not what we would hope the context to be, but where it actually was. This match is not exactly hot property at the moment, this Trophée des Champions match, and essentially it is Qatar trying to keep French domestic football as part of the conversation as they are invested in it. Or that's certainly my interpretation, that they are invested in it. And then the question is that how interested would Qatar be organizing Trophée des Champions, say, if PSG was not part of it? If it was, some other 2 clubs playing against each other, then would there be interest to organize that match? Well, that's another conversation, but it's also a hypothetical point right now because that hasn't been the case. Well, the match itself was a sleepy affair with some chances, pretty good ones as well, but essentially very wasteful finishing, especially on the first half, but even continuing on the second one. And I'm really not here to give you blow-by-blow account, but what were the talking points? What did we learn about our team or any other thing in this match? Well, I was already talking about this, but it starts to look fairly inescapable that for whatever reason Luis Enrique believes in this concept of false 9 over a real 9. Essentially, his starting position for the team is not to have a striker in the box, but rather play a little further around it. And who is the false 9? Well, that keeps on changing. There's not like a one player. It's not that, we have such a great player for that position. That player keeps on changing. And we really only have a one target player, and that is Gonzalo Ramos. It's been a strategy that when Gonzalo Ramos was injured, that it made sense that, of course, we didn't really have a proper backup for him. So it made sense that we're playing with false 9 because that was essentially what was best that was available. In a Champions League, I think especially this happened with very limited results, even domestically, but domestically it was enough. But in Champions League, we have seen that it was lacking in effectiveness. That's been evident, to say the least, at least so far, and hopefully this will change. But even now with Gonzalo Ramos being available, it seems that Luis Enrique prefers to play without a player like him, or to bring him in then as a super sub after the million chances without him haven't really resulted with almost anything that could be considered a serious threat. It's mainly shots that are either directly to the hands of a keeper or alternatively off target. And Ramos has been pretty lethal when he has been introduced into the game from the bench, and this time he came in on a 72nd minute of the match. In the end, he did not score this time around. He did not score a goal, but he was very close to it, actually twice, and on the second time, eventually the ball went back off the net. It was scored by Ousmane Dembele from Fabian Ruiz cross, but it was able to be scored quite easily because it was exactly Ramos who drew in the whole Monaco defense. I mean, he wasn't far from scoring himself, like said. He was very close to it, but in the absence of that slight contact between his toes and the ball, it went uninterrupted past him and the whole Monaco defense to Dembele, who had the whole goal on his mercy. And I'm very happy that Dembele scored. To be honest with you, I don't care really much who scores so long as someone does. Because, someone has to score the goals for us to get them. But I feel like Dembele, all things considered, was not that good in this match. He was selected as the man of the match, and that sort of thing tends to happen oftentimes in a matches like this for the one who in the end gets to score the goal. But there's something there that is lacking to me quite a bit. He did many great things, that's true, but then he only went on to water them down with some awfully blunt finishing efforts that the Monaco goalkeeper didn't have any issues with, like none whatsoever. To be honest with you, it's all well and good that he's building and dribbling outside the box, and that's him at his best. He's masterful in that, but at the end of the day, we also have to ask some serious questions also, because wearing the number 10 shirt for Paris, but also being the best paid player in the squad, the whole squad, that does not come without any expectations. Everybody else before him have had to bear those expectations in their shoulders. Zlatan had to do it. Neymar had to do it. Mbappe had to do it. Not getting into Messi, that was a different situation, and also not all of them were playing as with the number 10 shirt. But you get my point. These things, they don't come without expectation. It's not a free-for-all kind of situation. Is Ousmane Dembele giving us enough actual numbers, goals and assists? Basically, what I'm not saying is that he hasn't given them this season. He's having a pretty okay numbers this season. He's certainly been a bit better this time around, but I think it's a fair question, not necessarily to be answered right now, but going forward. Do we have enough of the proverbial finished product to justify his salary and role in the squad? Is this the type of stuff that in the long run, or even short, but let's say long run, competes to win the Champions League? Right now we are hoping to at least qualify to the knockouts, which is far from certain, but in the big picture, setting aside this specific season, going forward to the future, what do we need from our players, and specifically, what do we need from a player like Ousmane Dembele? Well, perhaps one thing is healthy competition. In the end, PSG won Trophée des Champions. I don't want to become numb to these things, even if it was for the 10th time in 11 last seasons. But even if this is just one match and potentially a reasonably good PR opportunity, if the French football doesn't get their act together and manage to market this match better, then is it really a match worth playing? It's a trophy, I get that, if only just, but it's nevertheless a trophy. But so was Coupe de la Ligue, and we have been fine without that one too. I'm not against this match, don't get me wrong. I'm not against this match, but at least in the 2020s, it has been a real mess. It's been a hot mess, so hopefully they will figure it out somehow so that it serves the purpose once more. The beginning of the new year also means January transfer window in the world of football, the second chance in the calendar to make amendments to the squad, to buy, to sell or loan in or out players mid-season as per needed. There's been quite a few rumors in most of those categories for PSG. The players who are on the departure list right now seem to be Randal Kolo Muani and Milan Skriniar. These two especially, they have not been playing or even really on the bench, including the match Trophée des Champions that was played last night as I'm recording. Both players came in 1.5 years ago, that summer that we had a lot of new players coming in, the whole rejuvenation of the squad. Neither one of them have really been given opportunities in the last autumn during this campaign. Not very much, very limited chances to prove themselves, which is unfortunate because both players are good players. They're not bad players, but just seemingly not very good match with what is needed in the current system, or for any other reason they are just not on the good list of Luis Enrique. You could basically add Marco Asensio on the list, and these players are, by the way, reportedly among the highest earners of PSG. Skriniar with the 4th highest salary after Dembele, Hernandez and Marquinhos. So then it's Milan Skriniar, the 4th of the squad. Then after him there's Hakimi, and then comes Marco Asensio. Then there's Donnarumma, and then there's Kolo Muani. So basically we have 4th, 6th and the 8th biggest earners of PSG are all essentially considered to be wasting these vast amounts of cash from the club's coffers. It all paints that summer window from 1.5 years ago in a very new light, because all these players came in at that time. But I guess when you hire a lot of players, then I suppose more mistakes can also occur. But you really have to at some point, and I think I will at some point soon, look into that whole thing. How effective was that big mercato when We had the whole rejuvenation of the squad. How effective was that? And that, by the way, even though I think it's safe to say that there are a lot of criticism for that, it didn't go as well as I was hoping for, as well as any one of us would have hoped for. I think it's also a little bit dangerous to get too critical about the work of Luis Campos, because at the end of the day, it's kind of a difficult job also, and it's easy to say that he's not doing it well enough, or there's too many misses and too few hits with his recruitments. But at the same time, this is a very dangerous thing, because if you fire someone like him, to get even somebody who is on his level as good as him is not easy. They are not very easily available, those people, and the ones that exist, they already are employed by somebody else. So it's a very complicated matter, the recruitment, and this is essentially what we're talking about during this transfer window. And of course, the obvious thing to say about this is also that there isn't such a thing as a free transfer when we're talking about players like, for instance, now Skriniar and Asensio. You know, when you make a contract with a free agent, like we did, for instance, with these two, Skriniar and Asensio, what you don't pay is the business-to-business transfer fee. You don't buy their contract from their previous employer, because that contract had already expired by the time. That's why they are free, but you make it up in salaries, sometimes signing bonuses, agent bonuses, things like that, all sorts of payments, but it's rarely a situation where you just get something for nothing. That's not how life works. And if you misfire, if you hire a wrong person as a free transfer, well, then you are stuck, because who really wants to match the salaries of these top earners who have been having very limited playing time and have even more limited achievement on the pitch in the recent past. This is essentially, by the way, what happened with people such as Wijnaldum and Ander Herrera also. It was very, very, very difficult to sell them in the end. Now, Skriniar and Kolomuani have, of course, had fairly consistent showing in their respective national teams. That is a very positive thing. I think Kolomuani, if my memory serves me well, he might have even been the top scorer of France last calendar year. So there's something about them, you know, but especially for him, his transfer fee was famously very high, reportedly around 90 million euros, although 15 of those were add-ons. Often those add-ons and bonuses are quite easily achievable, but I'm not sure if every box has been ticked and all euros had to be paid of those bonuses. Either way, it's a huge amount for a player who didn't work within the system. It's a huge error, and it's difficult to say. At the time, it was very much talked about that this was a hiring that Nasser Al-Khelaifi was forcing through, and perhaps it would have been sort of before the full control were given to other people, if it really ever happened in real terms. That I don't know. I can't be sure about that. But either way, 90 million, very, very huge money for somebody who essentially didn't work, you know, pretty much at any point. Basically, what I'm saying is that selling any of these players now will not be easy. It's possible, but it's not easy, because they probably would want the new team to at least match the salaries that they currently have, and that of course is a very big ask. From Skriniar and Asensio, there could be some sort of a transfer fee coming, which would be helpful, but let's say hypothetically, if we could sell all those players, if that happened, and I don't expect that to happen, at least one goal, least of all in this January, but hypothetically, if that did happen, then how much money would be made? I suppose less than Kolomuani's transfer cost 1.5 years ago, I imagine. But if you manage to somehow do it, then of course the main benefit would be get these names of high earners off of our salary list. Unfortunately, a more likely option, if the past experience is anything to go by, certainly is a loan deal where we end up paying an often sizable chunk of their salaries while they play for another club. January transfers are for us fans and for press to talk about. It's a little more conversation, a lot less action. According to press, anything is possible and all things are supposedly in negotiations, but in reality, very little, if anything, happens. It's like a millennium bug that 25 years ago had the papers talking about it like it was the end of the world, sometimes as it could be the end of the world. And yet in the end, essentially nothing happens and no one is accountable for anything that was said, days before. Life simply moves on. That's the way these things work. The real reality is that in order to understand football business, you have to try to understand the media because these two are very intertwined, right? This is what's happening, especially in this current context. And I'm not saying that nothing will happen, definitely, just that very little tends to happen in January. Very little, if anything. That's just the way that it has been going. And perhaps this year it's different. Perhaps it's different and I will look foolish for saying these things, this brief analysis, if you will. But I take that then and admit my mistake. If that is the case, that's okay. And if we're able to sell these players or make good deals, then I'll be so happy to have been wrong. I don't have any problem to admit the mistake then, but nevertheless, this is something that tends to happen. Not a lot. Having said that, let's have a quick look at the rumors of incoming players. These are rumors, so take them as such. Marcus Rashford keep on being connected to PSG according to press, but I think that signing him would be insanity, and also I don't think that he's really actually connected to us. I think this is mainly stories and fabrications by the press and maybe something that is launched by his agents and people like that. It's just something to say. Now, Mo Salah would definitely not be a January business, but he had said now in a Sky Sports interview, sort of a side note initially, that it's his last year in Liverpool. Let's listen to that clip quickly. So he had mentioned the idea almost as a side note, like said, and then revisited by the journalist. And when you read it online, it sounds like a declaration. But is it really? Let's listen to it. This is what happened.
You said this is my last season at the club. Do you really believe that when you say it?
Yeah, so far, it's the last 6 months. There is nothing, no progress there. Like we're far away from any progress, so we just need to wait and see.
Well, judge for yourself. I feel like he's far from certain to leave Liverpool, but the pressure is on for them also to find some money to keep him there and to prioritize. If they want to have him, I suppose they have to prioritize him over something else because he is at this point not going to be a very cheap player to keep or to have. It's part of the negotiations, I guess, but of course, if PSG would offer the money he wants, anything at least technically is possible. Is it probable? That's a different thing altogether, but it's possible. So if anything, that could be a lead for the summer. That is the next summer, even if for now it is most likely, I think, that this is his way of putting more pressure on Liverpool to make him a better offer. That tends to happen. We don't quite know. He's a great player, not a young player, but right now he is on top of the world and he has been performing on a very high level for many, many years, of course. So nothing negative to say about the player, really a good, strong player who I think could give a lot to PSG, but this is such a speculative talk that I don't even know if it's worth wasting our time with that. It would also be a little bit of a departure from this recent idea of hiring young and if possible French players. But here's the thing. PSG must compromise this at some point in order to have the names in the squad that will fill the stadium up. There's a plan to build a new and bigger stadium. It could be somewhat bigger or a lot bigger, but without some of the stars like we used to have, it won't be filled in the same way unless, you would bring the ticket prices down. Chance would be a fine thing, but even if the stadium won't be up and running for a few more years at least, we have to have Parc des Princes full in every match. Otherwise, why bother with something bigger? So someone like Mo Salah would answer a few of our issues, but it's something that even if it would happen, and it is far from it at the moment, it would only happen earliest next summer. And by the way, I think Parc des Princes is sold out. It's just not always full. Those are two slightly different things. It's not so much about the profit, but an atmosphere. Another name is our own Titi Parisien and someone I have always liked a lot. That's Christophe Nkunku. He seems like a good guy, and it was him and Moussa Diaby at the time who I had wished to get more of a chance in PSG, but it was practically nearly impossible for a young player at the time to make a breakthrough in our attacking line because we essentially had the competition for them. That was Neymar, Kylian Mbappe, Edinson Cavani, Angel Di Maria, Julian Draxler was there, even Choupo-Moting was there at the time. So for a young player to get significant amount of minutes, certainly in a position that would be their own position, just seemed like too much of an off chance to really happen at the time. And if Nkunku could play as a winger, I think it would be worth a shot. Not sure about the wisdom of this false nine business at all. I was talking about it earlier, and so far I feel like what we have to show for it isn't massively impressive, certainly this season. That's more or less what Nkunku's role has been for some years now, both in Leipzig but also now in Chelsea. And my heart says resounding yes to Christophe Nkunku, and then the brain, well, no, it feels a little bit more undecided. It could go either way, and of course this deal is far from reality at this point anyway, but just to mention it as it has been mentioned in the rumor section. The word on the street is that PSG is looking to have some reinforcements and competition to the wings, but many of the big names have been more or less ruled out at this point at least. Of course, things can always change. One departure, which I actually don't believe will happen at all, but is talked about nevertheless, not for this January so much, but in general, perhaps later down the line, who knows, next summer it would be, but like I said, I don't think it's going to happen. That is Nuno Mendes. Nuno played his 100th match in our shirt last night at Trophée des Champions. His contract expires in 1.5 years, but reportedly he is unhappy. I suppose he's mainly unhappy with the money. If the reported salaries are accurate, he has every right to be, as his salary is far below what it should be if you compare it to any of our other players. So I think he just needs a new and much better offer, and then we're good to go. I would like to hope that should be enough. I do think he is worth the money, especially considering how much we're paying people like Skriniar and Asensio, players like that who don't really get a looking at this point, and yet they are earning a lot more than somebody like Nuno Mendes, who is essentially one of our few regular starters. We don't even have that many regular starters, and he's one of them. The long and the short of this mercato is that manage your expectations. There will be a lot of talk. There always is a lot of talk, but a lot less action, and that's just based on how these things tend to go every year. January is a pretty intense month for football for PSG. The Trophée des Champions has now been played and won. We are still domestically unbeaten during this current campaign. We have Saint-Etienne coming in on the 12th of January, then Espali in Coupe de France. That match might see a lot of rotation. And who knows, Presnel Kimpembe. To be honest with you, if Kimpembe doesn't get any minutes in that match, I'm not even sure what to think about his situation, but hopefully he will be back by the end of that evening anyway. After that match, we have Lens in Ligue 1, Manchester City in Champions League, Reims in Ligue 1, and Stuttgart then on the 29th of January 2025 to finish the month of January, as well as the first ever league phase of Champions League. Then we will know if we are in or out of the next additional qualification round in order to get to the round of 16. It's been something. So far, I feel very emotionally detached from this new system, and not just because our results haven't been great. I mean, that's true also, but I think it's a slightly separate matter. It just all feels a bit arbitrary somehow. I haven't felt like the same sense of competition as I used to during the group stage, which was so much clearer. This is not to say there was the whole thing, oh, it's complicated, this is too complicated, as if we're somehow like intellectually challenged. Like, of course, we understand the league phase system. It's not a complicated system. I just don't really just resonate with me in the same way. Certainly in this first year, it just has not felt like that. There was something to be said about the group stage. I don't think there was anything wrong with that. Even if PSG usually got one of the more difficult, if not the most difficult group. Nevertheless, I think that it was something that I preferred more than this. And maybe my opinion will change in time. It's like one of those things like with VAR, people like first like it and then they hate it, or then they first hate it and then they like it, or they see its value. But I don't know. I'm still leaning towards the old system as having been better. Certainly not problematic enough to change into this. I don't think that it has improved. Maybe there could be improvement, but I'm not sure if this was it. And of course, it needs to be said that the supporters of clubs that have been doing well in that probably beg to differ anyway. But for me, it has not been all that. PSG women are starting their new year on Tuesday the 7th, that is tomorrow as I record, against FC Fleury 91. There's Coupe de France also for them after that on Sunday the 19th of January. That's the big night for them. That's the same day as men are playing against Lens. The women's team is playing against Olympique Lyonnais at Parc des Princes. So if you are in Paris, go and watch it, support them. The tickets tend to be very affordable in these matches, and this might be the only opportunity, the one opportunity to see the women's team at Parc des Princes this season. So far, the only one in the books at least, and without the Champions League, it might stay that way. Thank you for listening. More next time. I'm not in a position to make promises how often I record these days. I was very consistent for almost 3 years, but now it's become a little bit more challenging. But please leave a comment under the episode where you can. In places like YouTube and Spotify, there you can leave a comment. At least in those places, and rate and review, things like that. Let me hear from you. Let me hear from you just to get an idea that you are listening, if you are listening. And if you are listening, thank you very much. This is PSG Review. My name is Mikko. Thank you so much and do take care. Until next time, peace.